So what's your podcast about?
Mostly mysteries and the unknown, conspiracy theories, the occasional restaurant review.
Maybe I could check it out sometime.
Really? Yeah.
The build-up of energy before something happens, the way your hair stands out before lightning strikes. In ancient cultures, the moth represents a form of the psyche or the soul immortally trapped in the hellish death realms. Their motivations aren't human.
Welcome to Truth and Shadow, your guide through the supernatural. I am your host, BT, and this is a Shadow Short. Let's navigate the unknown on this brief journey into the depths of mystery. I've always found it strange, a little unsettling, that the world insists on being ordinary. We walk through our days surrounded by familiar objects, our cell phone, coffee cups, street lights, cars. And we start to believe this is all there is. Concrete, plastic, fluorescent bulbs buzzing above us in the aisles of some grocery store. We convince ourselves that the world is manageable. It's safe. But if you paused long enough, if you listen between the hum of the lights and the pings of the notifications, you catch something else. Something that doesn't quite belong. And the strange presses in, like a presence, flitting just in your peripheral vision. Sure, most people would laugh it off. They'll call it a superstition, or maybe a trick of the mind. But I've come to believe that those shadows, those strange ripples in reality are not accidents. They're not glitches in the program. They're hints, echoes of something that wants us to remember that reality is larger than a spreadsheet and a paycheck. And maybe that's why I'm talking to you. Exploring what happens when the veil gets thin. Sure, there are stories, very old ones, of figures who stepped down from the heights of heaven, if that's the language you want to use, or those who crossed some threshold from the other side. They came close to humanity. They were called Watchers. Beings who taught forbidden knowledge, who mingled with us. Those who blurred the line between divine and mortal. Some see them as angels who fell. Others see them as archetypes, myths we told ourselves to explain the sudden arrival of technology, or the sudden intrusion of things that didn't belong in the human village. Whatever they were, they carried with them a paradox. They were guides, but guides who led us astray. Wisdom that poisoned even as it illuminated. And if you're thinking that's all ancient history, some dusty old tomb buried in a forgotten chamber, I'd invite you to consider how often this story repeats. Every new invention, every new promise of power, there's this shadow hiding behind it. Now, the Watchers were either flesh and blood or a dream and symbol, but either way, they still walk with us. They could be the archetype of what Jung might have called the fallen guide, the so-called mentor who betrays. Maybe even the teacher who has wounds, called the light that blinds. And whether you take that literally as beings who once walked the earth or psychologically as forces in the deep unconscious mind, the effect seems to be the same. They remind us that the world has always been haunted by more than what meets the eye. These days we're told not to think that way anymore, that modern spirituality prefers a sanitized version of faith, neat little prayers, clean sermons. Maybe give it a self-help spin. Evil is talked about in abstractions, metaphors for selfishness or bad habits. But the ancient stories weren't so tame. They insisted that evil had a personality and it had agency, that it walked into the lives of people and whispered secrets that made humanity stumble. When you erase that dimension, you don't merely lose color from a canvas. It's more like you lose the ability to see what's there. I think Carl Jung warned us about this. He said that the parts of the psyche we refuse to acknowledge, they don't disappear. They become autonomous. They turn into complexes, fragments of the soul, parts of our mind that act occasionally with a will of their own. They seem to haunt us, literally maybe. But it's in the myths of the Watchers that we are told that there are forces that cannot be safely ignored, and that demands acknowledgement. And when modern preaching or modern psychology tries to bleach out the mystery, tries to domesticate the dark, it leaves us unprepared. I think of it this way. Imagine a society that locks every shadow in the basement and then paints every wall white. Eventually, the basement's going to fill up and the shadows are going to start leaking through the cracks. Even though you have done your best to illuminate the spaces and make no shadows cast and make the walls a vibrant color, you may hear them in the pipes at night. You may see them leaking through the cracks of the door. You may feel them in the cold spots in the hallway. You can even catch them in the flicker of the lights. And when that happens, when the basement door rattles, the people who pretended shadows weren't real have no idea what to do. Which brings me to another story, a haunting, a house where the walls began to talk, where footsteps pounded in the night and the family couldn't explain it away. This wasn't some Hollywood film, it was real life for them. Before the invention of horror films or EMF detectors. I'm talking about a personage, the home of a minister's family who we talked about in last week's episode. We're talking about people who were supposed to be safe from such things, but night after night something invisible rattled, knocked, mocked, and refused to leave. And that family, the Wesley family, did what most of us would do. They prayed. Sometimes they tried to rationalize. They tried to endure. And they documented all of it. But either way, if it was a ghost or people up to nefarious aims, it might not be that much different than calling it a shadow. Because at the end of the day, whether you say it's the unconscious breaking through or a spirit banging on the walls, the effect is the same. You are forced to face the fact that your world is not as stable as you thought. And this is what's strange to me. That instability, that feeling, is not always a curse. For some, it seems to be a gift. The haunting forces us to see what we have buried. It confronts us with the reality that the self is bigger than the ego, that the world is bigger than the sidewalk. It calls us to discernment, to maturity, and to something deeper than cliche slogans. When I think of the Watchers and some of these haunting stories together, I see two sides of the same coin. The Watchers remind us that knowledge is never innocent. The haunting reminds us that the past never seems to stay buried. But both are interruptions. Both tear holes in the fabric of the ordinary. Both of these are interruptions. Both are invitations to take the supernatural seriously. Not as childhood cartoons, not as entertainment, but as something that shapes the soul. Thank you for listening to Truth and Shadow Podcast. Here, we talk about shadows, about battles seen and unseen, but no warrior marches without his weapon. And for us, that weapon is the Word of God. Deus Vult Rebinding takes the Bibles we've carried through fire and storm and custom binds them in new leather, designed to last for generations. It's your Bible reborn as your sword. Deus Vult Rebinding, for the Word, for the battle, for the King. The danger, of course, is obsession. I've seen people fall into that pit. I was there once. And once you taste that strange feeling, once you can sense the veil is thin, you can get hooked. Every creak in the floorboards becomes some secret message you try to decipher. Every shadow in the corner becomes an entity of some kind. And people can spiral. They will lose themselves to the pursuit of the phenomenon, chasing proof, chasing manifestations, until they forget that the supernatural was never about spectacle. It's about transformation. So how do you live in a world where shadows are real without being consumed by them? I think it begins with humility. The supernatural is not a pet. It's not a Netflix genre. It's more like an ocean, and we're children playing at the edge of the waves. I believe Jung called it the numinous, that shiver you feel when you stand before something greater than yourself, something wholly other, something awesome that both terrifies and fascinates. The healthy response to numinous is awe, not addiction. That means discernment. Not every shadow is worth chasing. Not every voice in the night deserves your attention. Just as not every dream is prophetic. Not every flicker of light is a ghost. The trick is to listen without being swallowed whole. To acknowledge it without being enslaved. And maybe that's where faith comes in. Not the kind that's reduced to bumper stickers, but the kind that anchors you when the walls start to shake. Faith says, yeah, there are sinister forces. Yeah, there are hauntings. Yeah, the veil is thin. But you don't have to be afraid. You don't have to chase every shadow. You can recognize the reality of the supernatural without letting it define your every waking thought. You can walk with the mystery instead of running from it, or running into it like a moth into the flame. And I've said before that the world insists on being ordinary, but maybe it's us who insist. Maybe the world has always been extraordinary, always haunted, always alive with presences. And maybe our real task is not to explain them away, not to obsess over them, but to live here with them, to let them go about their business while we go about ours. But I can't help wondering if we've trained ourselves to ignore that extraordinary on purpose. There may be a comfort in pretending the universe is a closed system. If we keep enough lights on, maybe the shadows can't touch us. If we schedule our days with enough noise, maybe the silence won't whisper. But of course it does. The silence always whispers. You can drown it out with music, with podcasts, with arguments on the internet. But at 3 a.m, when the hum of the refrigerator is the only sound left in the house, you hear it. You feel it. That sense that you're not alone. And is there some kind of irony in this? I think so. And even if we deny it, we spend billions at the box office trying to chase it. Ghost movies, zombie movies, demon movies, stories of possession, exorcism, of haunted houses. We'll pay a full ticket price to be scared, but we won't admit that the fear is older than Hollywood, and dare I say older than campfire tales. It's in us. We're wired for the supernatural. Our psyche aches for mystery, even as our rational minds try to choke it out of us. Carl Jung knew it. He said that the collective unconscious doesn't disappear because we pretend it isn't there. It will erupt. It will break through in symbols, in synchronicities, in dreams, in hauntings. So maybe the haunting in that the Wesley family parsonage wasn't some noisy ghost. Maybe it was the psyche of a family cracking under the pressures no one spoke of. Maybe the raps and the knocks were some kind of language of the unconscious, demanding to be heard. Or maybe it really was something from the other side, some presence taking advantage of their thin walls and their sleepless nights. Do we really need to choose? Both could be true. The psyche and the spirit overlap in ways we don't understand. That means a haunting is both a projection and an encounter. It can be a mirror and a visitation. It's both psychology and metaphysics at once. And that may be the part that unnerves us. We want our categories neat. Science here, faith for some way over there in a different town. We want psychology in this box. Spirituality way over there with those who dance in the woods. But the world isn't neat. The world is quite messy. And we know the supernatural is blurry. The Watchers step out of myth and into history. A haunting will step out of trauma and into the hallway. And suddenly those neat little boxes don't matter anymore. What matters is whether we have the courage to face what's actually in front of us. Some nights I think about those Watchers, those beings who descended, who broke barriers. The ancient texts describe them as shining ones, terrifying, compelling. But the core of their story appears to be simple. They taught humanity secrets it was not ready for. Metalwork, weapons, sorcery, the beautifying of the face, the art of deception. They gave gifts that were really poisons. Archetypally, they represent the danger of premature knowledge, the forbidden fruit, the shadow side of curiosity, and we're still living that story. Every time we invent some new technology without the wisdom to wield it, it's like we're reenacting that fall of the Watchers all over again. And there seems to be another layer. If these figures were real, and I believe they were, if they really did mingle with humanity, and I think they did, then we have to ask, why? What drove them to cross that line? Most likely it was pride. Could it have been compassion gone wrong? Was it the temptation to be more than what they were? And that's what fascinates me. These Watchers didn't seem to be monsters alone. They could be mirrors of humanity. They show us what happens when we chase the divine without humility. When we reach for transcendence but forget our own limits. And that's why we still need their story. Because it's ours, too. So what do we do with this? If the world is full of sinister forces and hauntings, full of possessions, oppressions, things that speak to our desires and archetypes that bleed into reality, how do we live without losing our minds? And this is the part that matters, because I've seen people spiral. They get one taste of the strange, one synchronicity too perfect to dismiss, one night where the footsteps creak down the hallway with no one there, and suddenly they're hooked. They want more. They want proof. They start recording every sound, chasing every cold spot, building their lives around this phenomena. And in the process, they forget to live. And that's the trap. The supernatural isn't meant to be collected like stamps. It's not meant to be your entertainment. It's meant to wake you up, to jolt you into remembering that life is more than work, more than emails, more than grocery lists, more than podcasts. But once it wakes you up, you have a choice. Do you keep staring into the abyss, trying to catalog everything? Or do you let the experience transform you, deepen you, dare I say, integrate you, without consuming you? I think about the way people talk after a brush with the supernatural. Some are terrified, scared. they're never the same. Occasionally you'll hear stories that they're humbled or sobered up and strangely at peace. Gosh, and I wonder what makes the difference between these two instances, and I think it's whether they tried to control it. The ones who spiral are the ones who treat the supernatural like a drug. One hit, then another, then another. But the ones who grow are the ones who let it happen, who accept the mystery without needing to master it, who, by all means, let the encounter teach them instead of trying to put it in a box so that they can stare into it from time to time. And you know, I've talked about the Jungian angle quite a bit on this show. It's about integration. This shadow side of ourselves is not the enemy to be annihilated. Sometimes the stuff that we have repressed is a teacher waiting to be heard. It's not to be obeyed, it's not there to be worshipped, but acknowledged. You see, the moment you deny it, the moment you pretend you're all goodness, all light, nothing's wrong with you, that's when it gains power. It grows in the basement of your soul, rattling the pipes of your bones, shaking the walls of your mind until one day it bursts out like a perceived haunting or a breakdown. But if you can face it, if you can admit that this thing that makes us similar to those watchers is still inside of us, that the ghosts of your past will come knocking, you're going to rob it of its power to enslave. You make the unconscious conscious. You bring light into the dark without trying to bleach the dark away. Maybe that's the balance. Live as if the world is more than it seems, because it is. But don't live as if you're the master of the unseen, because you're not. Accept that you're part of a story older than you, a drama of shadows and light that plays out across generations. Just let the supernatural remind you of your place, not at the center of the universe, but within it. Not as the conqueror of mystery, but as the one who walks with it. And of course, living with mystery is easier said than done. We've trained to want things all the time. We want a yes or a no. We want a true or false. We want it all. But the spiritual laughs at these categories. It shows up in the in-between, in the liminal places, into dreams that spill into our waking lives. They become voices that are in your own mind. The liminal space is the home of the numinous, and the liminal is the one thing modern life has almost erased. We live in a world of bright lights and sharp lines, where midnight looks like noon because the street lamps never turn off. We've banished thresholds, we've smoothed out every edge, and then we wonder why mystery feels so far away. But it isn't far, it's pressing against the glass. We've just forgotten how to see. Could that be why these stories linger? After all, the Watchers are liminal beings. They're boundary crossers. They weren't meant to be here. Their actions are a warning to us today, but they're also a reminder that that veil is thin. Thinner than we think, and that's because we should tread carefully, because when you blur those boundaries, when you meddle with forces you don't understand, you don't just gain knowledge, you awaken consequences. That's what the obsession with the supernatural misses. People think that they can gather enough evidence, enough recordings, enough encounters, they'll finally have control. But the more you stare into the abyss, the more the abyss stares back. That's not just poetry, that's experience. People who dive too deep never come back. And once you open that door, it doesn't always close easily. Yet the alternative isn't to ignore it. To live as if the world is boring, as if it's ordinary, as if it's just common, is its own kind of death. I mean, the greatest neurosis of our time is the loss of meaning. You strip the world of mystery and you strip the soul of oxygen. We don't thrive in sterile boxes. We thrive in the cosmos, alive with symbols. So maybe the question isn't whether to engage with the supernatural, but how. How do you keep your balance while walking the knife edge between skepticism and belief? And that's my problem, isn't it? Wanting to believe, but knowing belief can harm me. Doubting, but knowing I can be blinded by doubt. The answer, I think, is awe. Awe is different from fear. Fear either makes us run or makes us fight. Awe makes us pause, makes us listen. It reminds us, sure, that we're small, but we're not insignificant. I do believe awe is the antidote to oppression, because oppression tries to own the mystery, tries to own you, to become obsessed with it. Now, I've met people who tell me about their encounters, seeing lights in the sky, shadows in the room, creatures who don't look human, that they have dreams so vivid they couldn't shake them. Some of them lean in with hunger, wanting to catalog it all, to dissect it, to control it. Those are the ones who end up lost. Others speak with a trembling voice. They're humbled by it. Not because the encounter was easy, but because it reminded them of something deeper, something older. And it's those who carry the supernatural well. So maybe the real practice isn't hunting the supernatural, but learning to cultivate awe. When the mysterious, the supernatural comes, when the walls knock, when those old stories whisper to you, don't rush to capture it. Just let it be. Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.